basically didn't do any.
Okay.
It was neat. One of the things I started to notice was, one example was during driving, that I was just basically saying the car, noticing the car in front of me stopped, and then I would notice that the foot would go down and depress the brake. And so I got to see that it was just me saying what was going on, and then life was doing things. I used to just think that was automatic, but started to observe that there were instances where there were things that were not automatic that were going on. There was an incident where I was standing in a line full of people, and that somebody was smoking that was with me, and I wanted a cigarette, and there was a woman behind me fanning herself, and I said, I want to smoke. I'm not going to be comfortable smoking with this woman fanning herself. And the next thing I knew, I was saying, can you please save our place in line? We're going to go across the street and smoke. And I looked at that and I thought, that was incredibly appropriate and not anything that I thought of. And so I had some opportunities to see that just me saying what was going on, life was doing things, and that I was just kind of experiencing that, and it was being expressed through this body.
I only had the experience being aware of enjoying taking a walk. I didn't notice anything else about it except that I wanted to walk someplace. I did it and I enjoyed it. The sensations of walking felt great.
What else?
You're supposed to look for moments when we inexplicably do something that seems inappropriate, but it turns out to be for the best, right?
I don't know if you're supposed to. It was a suggestion.
Well, that was a suggestion at the end of the class. Well, I remember people ask me all the time to use the studio for their little student projects or films or whatever, and I always say no because it's always a drag. But one time in May, someone asked me, and I don't know why, but I just said yes, for a student movie. And sure enough, the student movie was a drag, and it was a forgettable experience, except I met Tina.
Except what?
Except I met Tina,
Oh.
which was very profitable.
So they happen. What else?
Well, I continued observing the four forces when they were working, and found that when I got to the end of the four forces, the result could sometimes be a new initiation, but I didn't initiate it. It was just something happened where X was doing it. So I saw a relationship between the four forces, and that's where X came in the four forces as well. But that's what was so interesting to me, that there's a new initiation that I didn't do, I didn't think of, had nothing to do with me. It was a result of what had happened previously and started a new chain of events that X did. So I saw that was an initiation.
It's all perfectly clear to you? Your mouse fell off. Forgot how to use it. Don't believe in asking questions.
Could you give an example?
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. The example was that last week something very disturbing happened to me at work. There was a situation that I pointed out to my bosses that was not good, and in doing so, I unconsciously accused my director of making a placement we shouldn't have made with a very so-called bad result. And when I was thinking about that, I was telling X, this is the situation that went on, and that I didn't feel good about it. I just didn't feel good about it. And after that had happened several days, the thought came to me, well, you know, X is present in this life. And it was with no real context, just that thought. And then I started feeling very comfortable. There was a feeling of well-being that came about because of that. And when I felt this feeling of well-being, then the experience was that everything's all right here. I'm not going to try to fix this. This is just the way I feel about it now. And the result, or the form that took, was that they restructured everything we're doing at work, our department, what I'm doing, and took me off a lot of supervisory work, and in effect gave me time to review files, which is what I'm supposed to be doing now. Now actually that was the result I wanted all along, but I didn't do that to get that result. What I did was unconscious and thoughtless. But as I watched the form appear, I realized that's what I wanted from the beginning. So X responded in this situation, and the result was exactly what I wanted. So that's how I experienced X working there with it. It was not my intent, but it happened to be what I wanted. So that was an example.
Anything else?
This is not from last week when I was dead, but the week before. I went about finding resistance by looking at things that pissed me off. And what I found was that the things that I was complaining about turned out to be just aspects of things that I had asked for and I didn't want them to go away, such as I set out to cook with my mother, something we like to do. And every time and we're talking all day as we're cooking, and every time I look down at my recipe and try to measure out 6 cups of something or whatever I'm doing, trying to read it, she's talking away, and I'm just, shut up, please shut up, just let me read my recipe. And then, you read it 12 times and you still don't get it because someone's talking at you. And after spending quite a bit of time just being so resentful and thinking, my God, why doesn't she shut up? Why doesn't she see I'm trying to read? I noticed, that that's an essential part of cooking with another person, is that some of the time they're going to be talking when you need to concentrate, and that I was resistant to her in precisely the same way, because when I didn't need to concentrate on anything, but she did, I'd blather at her. So anyway, I just saw that it was an experience that I had asked for. I had invited this person to come and cook with me and disturb me while I was trying to measure the eggs, and so it was kind of silly to then resent the situation that I had asked for. And there were a lot of situations like that where the thing that I was resenting was also the thing that I wanted, and if you'd given me the choice, well, you want to send Mom back to Nebraska, I would have said, no, I'm having fun here. So
So any observations?
I noticed I wanted to change the resistance, or have it not happen.
How many people noticed what she's said, at least in part, that a lot of the things that I get upset about are the resistance to what I've initiated? Well, you didn't say it to me. I'm reading notes. Now, how many went on to make that observation that she made about that? That's what I mean by an observation. It's one thing to notice something, it's another thing to inquire in it and consider it, isn't it? And make it a part of my life. Make it something real. So that maybe the next time second force disturbs me, I'll remember a way that I looked at it once before and it stopped being disturbing. But if I don't see that relationship, then And I'll just go through it every single time, over and over again, won't I? Because I didn't keep looking at that thing and say, is there a relationship here that I've just never noticed before? So that's what I mean when I say observations. I really mean, do you see any relationships in the stuff that you've been talking about? I had a few little experiences of some things that, do I see them in relationship to me and to living? Or are they just little experiences that I'm going to think about and make up new beliefs and conclusions about? Okay. That's part of an inquiry, isn't it? Is to try and look at the things that I've observed and put them into relationship with all the other things that I've seen about living. Okay. So, do you see any relationships out of all this stuff you've been talking about?
One thing that I observed, and I haven't fully seen it, is that whenever, on the times when resistance came up and I started the complaining game about the resistance, I didn't have a form. The other times when I said, yes, this is disturbing, and went ahead and did what I was going to do anyway, I got a form.
Okay. So how do I relate that to my life? Again, we have an observation.
Mm-hmm.
How do I see this in relationship? Doesn't it relate to everything?
Yeah.
And I get the feeling sometimes like these things are just sort of lapped out there as little standalone events. And that may be just because it hasn't happened enough that we feel comfortable saying this may be an accurate observation. I mean, seeing it 2 or 3 times means nothing, does it? It just means that maybe it happened 2 or 3 times. I gotta see it for a while before I can really say there may be something in this. But what's in it is not a conclusion, but a relationship. So I see these things in relationship to me and the life that I live.
One of the things that came up from seeing that was is that I had to say to myself, or question, what I'm asking for, because I'm asking for all the stuff. It's kind of like reporting to X, yes, but I want this, but I don't want to do any of the work with it. That's the attitude I'm seeing the most, and I'm seeing it in work, because I'll initiate, something will come up, there'll be resistance, I'll start to complain, and then I'll wonder why I'm not certain, but I have a feeling this might relate to all the cancellations I'm getting as well. That was one of the things that I've been considering.
But that's back to, again, not seeing second force as part of the act. There is no relationship here yet, there's an idea. If I get to the point where I see this relationship, that's just the way things work, why would I want to complain about it?
Right.
So that's exactly what I'm trying to talk about. A few observations have been made, an idea has been heard to some degree, but it's not being seen in relationship. So then every time the second force comes along, I do the same old thing. Because I still haven't seen that relationship. These 4 forces are necessary. Whether I like them or not is really irrelevant. They're necessary. And you were one of the people that said that you saw the same thing that she did. that just about everything that you ever were upset about was second force, well, at that point you start to make some relationships, don't you think? And then you go on further to say that when I resist the second force, I end up with nothing at all except a headache. Or whatever. The only thing I get is destroyed. Which is one of the things that is said about these four forces, that if you resist the resistance, it will destroy you. After a certain point of seeing this, I start to form some relationships here. Say, wait a minute. Look at the way I'm living. It is not exactly in accord with reality. I'm living in some dream world somewhere. It sure is not on planet Earth. I can see that very clearly. That's to see relationships with this stuff, to self and the life that I'm living, isn't that right?
Right.
And that's where we want to eventually go, isn't it? To be able to take these ideas and make them not just ideas, but things that I start seeing in relationship to everything that I look at. So everywhere I look, I see the four forces. When resistance comes up or things that disturb me, I start to understand what disturbs me is resistance. If I'm disturbed right now, there is quite possibly, I can't say it is true because there might be other things that I don't know about yet, but it's quite possible that what's disturbing me is second force because it has seemed to be that way many times. Now I can't say that's absolutely true because there are possibly other things I don't know about, but I can at least look to find out. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
I won't stand here and say absolutely for certain this must be second force. But I've at least seen this relationship enough that the next time I start getting disturbed, I can say, well, wait, before we get too carried away with being disturbed here, let's find out if this is second force to something I initiated. In which case, I might be kind of glad it's here instead of disturbed. I said I wanted this. Now, I can change my mind now and say I don't want it, I suppose. Or I can be grateful for an incredible gift called second force that will allow this to come about. And now I've changed the way I look at things by seeing things in relationship to me in the world that other me. Okay? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I appreciate the observations. I'm very pleased that some things are being seen. Let's also consider them in relationship to ourselves and our living. Okay? And we did get a little bit of that tonight. I'm not saying nobody did any of it, but we did get a little bit of it. The thing that Paula said certainly showed seeing in relationships, doesn't it? This sucks. And then a couple minutes later, but there is this being called X. And I've sort of seen he takes care of things, so, okay, it sucks. That's real different than, it sucks now, what am I going to do? This is just like, it sucks, but it'll probably get taken care of. And you shrug your shoulders and go on about your business, waiting perhaps with some considerable interest to see just what rabbit will get pulled out of the hat this time. Mm-hmm. That's seeing in relationship, isn't it? So the things that would have before just thrown me right into very habitual behavior take me to an entirely different place. Okay? So it's another thing we can add on to our experimenting. That it's not just to observe what I observe, but it's to take the time to inquire into it and say, what does this say about living? If I admit that these observations are accurate, if I've made enough that I can say, I kind of see that maybe this idea I'm working with is true, because so far I haven't found a contradiction to it, what does that say about living? And do some inquiry into it and begin to develop that ability to see in relationship. Not just in straight line, linear, logical, if-then type thinking. If this, then that. That's fine for math. It don't work too good in the world of four forces, where there is no cause and there is no effect. A dear friend used to tell a rather amusing story, at least to this one, about this subject. He used to tell a story about how one time there was a fellow who became very upset about something that happened at work. And it was just about lunchtime, so they went off and they ate their lunch while they were stewing about this thing that had happened at work. And a little while later, they began to have terrible indigestion. And it was bad enough that they felt they needed to be treated for it so that it would go away. And so they went to 3 different people to be treated. First, they went to a normal doctor, as we would call them, the accepted healers of our time, who did a little looking and found a little germ and said, well, that's the cause. And then a little while later, they weren't apparently satisfied with that, so they went to another practitioner who's a little bit more out on the fringes, you know, a chiropractor. And the chiropractor had noticed them a day or so earlier stumble. So they decided to check out the shape of the spine and do their little x-raying, and sure enough, they found that one of the vertebrae was out of alignment, so they said, well, that's the cause. And apparently they still weren't satisfied, so they went to a psychologist. Maybe they just had their therapy session, I don't know. And the psychologist heard about it all, and they said, well, did you get angry that day? And the person told them the story about being quite ticked off while they ate. And they said, well, this is your subconscious mind punishing you because you feel guilty over being so angry, because the person told them that while they were eating lunch, they were having thoughts of terrible revenge on the person who had mistreated them, which of course they never carried out. So the psychologist said, it's your subconscious mind punishing you because you feel guilty about those terrible thoughts that you had while you were so angry. And they said, that's the cause. Who's right?
None of the above.
How do you know?
Doesn't sound like anything I believe in.
Well, that certainly makes it wrong. Conclusive proof. I have a belief that says they're all wrong. Maybe they're all right. I can make a case for every single one of those. I can make a case for each one of those being the cause. We all know the doctor's case. I won't even bother to go into that. I'll tell you what the chiropractor's case is, that the nerves that were pinched as a result of those vertebrae being out of alignment caused incorrect signals to eventually get sent to the stomach, which began to malfunction, which then made it possible for some little animalcules to live inside there, and therefore they're absolutely right, that was the cause. Not the germ, but a pinched nerve that caused the organ called the stomach to malfunction, so that it was possible for the germ to survive in an environment that normally would destroy it, because that organ was no longer functioning. We already heard about the case for the psychologist. Anybody who does not know that disease can often be psychosomatic is a fool. They haven't even been paying attention to anything throughout their life here. That's something that's very clear at this point in time, that we cannot separate body and mind. They have an intimate relationship. So who's right?
I'd say they're all wrong because they didn't. They took one piece of it and looked at that and said that that was the only thing that had an effect. But they didn't look at any of the other. Each one may have had a part.
Yes, I get it. You don't have to show off. The only point I'm really trying to get at here is where's cause and where's effect. Now, if you're going to believe in cause and effect, then I guess you'd say, well, which one happened first? So the chiropractor would say, well, they stumbled first, because that was 2 days ago. And they got angry yesterday. And they developed symptoms last night. So the chiropractor would say, I won. Because mine happened first. Now, of course, it could have happened another way. But if you're going to believe in cause and effect, then that's the way you have to see everything. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means there is no cause. Ever. Because every time you look at a cause, you say it's actually an effect, isn't it? Of something else that happened before it. So apparently there's only one cause.
You were born.
And that was the Big Bang. And everything else is inevitable from there on, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's only one cause. So why bother with cause and effect?
Gotta blame somebody.
Legally justifiable.
But with the four forces, everything is in relationship. All these four forces are intertwined in incredible relationships. One force in one set of creativity is another force in something, so that the exact same thing becomes two different forces and two different chains of four forces. They're all unbelievably intertwined, and there is no cause and there is no effect. There's only many, many, many chains of the four forces all intertwined together. You better learn to see in relationship. The serial, straight line, logical thinking only works in certain kinds of human endeavors where we have purposely narrowed all the possibilities of life down, so that we've artificially, in other words, taken out all the possibilities and said we'll only allow certain kinds of things. And their logic works great, because we made up a place where it works. Okay. So all things that are seen, one works to say, can I find a contradiction before I will accept this idea as true? I don't care where it came from. I simply will not accept it. I don't care if the person says God himself told him. I'm not going to accept it until I have attempted to prove it wrong by observing, looking for contradictions. And if I've done that for a period of time and it looks pretty accurate, then it's sort of the next thing to do is to start saying, well, what does this say about living? What does this say about me? What does it say about my relationship with other things and other people? So that I can start to see it in relationship with all things. Okay? And then it becomes a very real part of my life, rather than something that I think about occasionally. It becomes the way that I see things. Okay? Any questions or comments?
Very cool.
Okay. I could say comments. Okay. Let's go back to this little thing we've been considering. Picture of man. Now, last week or a couple weeks ago, we talked about this as it might be when it's still integrated and functioning well. Where it looks kind of like this, X, awareness function, the physical body, and doing. And about all that's going on is that the body is sensing. And the awareness is checking things out and then making value judgments based on some undisclosed purpose. No, the one that we have disclosed, but some unknown one that doesn't say that the only thing I care about is whether or not a sensation feels good to me, but some other purpose. Because that purpose that says that the whole point of life is to keep good sensations going all the time disintegrates and does not create this thing that we're looking at now where it's nice and integrated, all right? So it has some other purpose it values by, we don't know what. But it does value some way, and that X responds with function. Okay. So it says that all things at all times obey universal law. And there's nothing that can be done about that. There's no way to break it. This is not a human-made law that you can break and then suffer penalties. Although, if you go to the library, you will find thousands of books that all talk about law, universal law. They all claim that there are interesting numbers of these, and they claim great significance to certain numbers, like 3 and 7 and 12. Those are very popular. They're called mystical. And they claim to know that there are these certain universal laws, and they, like I say, usually number 3 or 7 or 12. Sometimes they get really carried away and they have 3 sets of 12 and you get 36 when they apply to different things. But at any rate, there is only one universal law and it cannot be broken. And it says that this is always in a state of balance for its environment. So as the awareness processes all the sensory information from the body and makes sure it's true and sort of puts its understanding of living on it and then makes a value judgment about it, X then balances this entire being to the environment that's been described by its awareness function, which it never questions because that's why it made the awareness function in the first place, to do that job. Okay. So in an integrated being, this is really all there is other than some unknown purpose here. The only purpose that we know is not the one that we're talking about now. And that integration is X doing the appropriate thing, which is both physiological or biological and also an outward action. So some of these odd little things that we see where it appears that X just does things that we weren't expecting is just a part of the action of natural or universal law. It's balancing this being to the environment that has been reported, along with the value that's been placed on what has been described. So a lot of times we see odd things that we realize we really did not do. Most of the time we think we did it because we were considering it or whatever inside our heads as it happened, making up stories to justify it. But sometimes little odd, unexpected, unexplained things that we kind of look at and say, I would never have thought of that. I'm not sure where that came from, because that's the way it all actually works. The life force is constantly keeping this in balance with the environment that's been described. Okay? Because that's universal law. That's the way X works. Everything is always in motion towards balance. Okay? That's the only law there is. The 4 forces are the implementation of that, because it's the only way you can keep things in balance and allow for change. So they're actually the expression of universal law. They're the expression, in other words, of balance, because that's the way you do it. Okay? But all you can ever look at in this entire universe is the expression of universal law. You can never see universal law itself. That's an abstract, isn't it? But as it expresses, we see it in function. Now the difficulty comes with this thing that we've been talking about, that man being uncreated misunderstands second force because it's never bothered to look into it and sees it as something bad, and then describes a reality that doesn't exist. Because second force is not bad. It's part of the mechanism by which universal law comes into existence or expresses, isn't that right? It's not bad. It's just the way that universal law called balance works. So we describe this environment that we say that we're in that doesn't exist to X. So X balances us for an environment that doesn't exist. Except now we're out of balance, aren't we? Because no matter what you think, you are in an actual environment, no matter what you're dreaming. Except you're now out of balance because X did what the awareness said that was going on, it balanced to that.
It's like you're reporting to X that oxygen is poisonous. You know, and X is trying to do the appropriate thing.
Sure. That's exactly right. So the consequence of that is that I begin to feel uncomfortable because I'm not balanced to the environment I'm actually in. You see that? Mm-hmm. I'm balanced to some non-existent dream that's going on inside the head. But I'm out of balance in this actual environment. So I feel uncomfortable. We'll go into that a little bit more later because obviously it can't remain this way because universal law says I must be balanced. And at this moment I have actually gone out of balance and something will have to happen to deal with that. We'll worry about that later. But I just want to make this one simple point. Okay? If the awareness misdescribes its environment to X, X then balances one to the environment one has described, not the one that's there. And so as a result, I feel uncomfortable. And since I said that my entire purpose of living is to always feel comfortable, I am now disturbed. This is second force to my purpose, which is to be non-disturbed, and I get even more upset and describe another environment that is not there. No wonder we're all so uneasy and on edge all the time. So in order to do anything else with living, we're going to have to discover what is going on with this awareness that's constantly lying. Do you understand that? Every single time you feel uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form, whether it be uneasy emotionally, whether it be a little ache or pain in the body somewhere, whatever the discomfort is, it is because you are out of balance with your actual environment. It is an indication that you've been lying. Okay? And that you need to take a good look at what you're telling X. Because universal law just works. It doesn't, it's perfectly impersonal. It's works for everybody, good or bad, saint or sinner. Okay? And if I were integrated this way until we start messing it up, as we're going to do shortly, and making it fall apart, as we all have actually done. But if I just left it at this, then I can say I have one of two things here. If I just look at this picture as it is, with an awareness function, a life force, a physical body, and functioning going on, and some purpose, and I say that's all there is, folks, then I have one of two things. An incredibly young infant, or an integrated human being. One of the two. That's all it can be, as far as I know. I've never seen it happen under any other conditions. Okay? And when I say young infant, I mean young. I don't mean like 4 or 5, or 3, or 2. Okay? I mean really young. In fact, probably younger than 1. Because it isn't too far into all that this begins to disintegrate and we can no longer look at it in this integrated way, all right? But look at what you have here. You have this incredible relationship between this phenomenal intelligence that relies on an awareness function to give an individual expression to that intelligence. Isn't that right? This particular awareness sees it its way from its little spot in the universe as though it were the only thing that matters. That's not exactly right, but it sees it very much from its own point of view, doesn't it? Its unique point of view. So it gives this individual expression of this phenomenally vast intelligence that is running the whole show. And that's what you look at when you see an integrated human being or an incredibly young child. That's about the only 2 times you ever see that on planet Earth. Catch a kid real quick, because it won't last long. And you'll see an example of an integrated personality that is accurately, purely reflecting universal intelligence. Or, if you're ever lucky enough to run across somebody with an integrated personality, you can see exactly the same thing. That everything that happens in that person is a pure expression of intelligence. Because all the awareness is doing is describing what is going on as accurately as possible in relationship, because this being, this individual being, is always in relationship with something, and putting value based on some purpose that it has, what we don't know. And the only thing that you can see under those circumstances is X responding to that description. That's called an integrated personality, an integrated human. Unfortunately, since as a child we all decide that we hate second force, you don't see that for very long. Because pretty soon this begins to disintegrate and fall apart into means to get what doesn't exist, called a world without second force. Okay? Which will never happen. Are there any questions or comments before I mess this picture up? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll continue. Okay, so I'm going to remind us of the 4 little ideas that we're inquiring into. I'll probably be doing this a lot for a while. That says, creation is not finished. I am incomplete because I'm ignoring the biggest part of myself, called first force or X. Now we're going to look a bit at this idea that I'm uncreated and see what that means. When I was in the womb, this extraordinary thing happened. At one point in time, for some reason or another, I grew eyes. Isn't that odd? There was nothing to see. And then these little things budded off and I grew limbs. Why? There was nothing to do.
Kick mom.
Huh?
Kick mom.
I didn't even know I was doing that. But you're right. And I grew this incredible thing called a digestive system. Why? I was being fed through a tube. I even started growing organs of reproductions, and I was alone. I didn't finish it before I left, but I started. So I was prepared at that time for an environment that I was not in. Isn't that right? Everything was set up at that point in time because X knew that I would not stay where I was for very long, and that there would come a time when if I did not have those things, I would not be able to survive where I was going. Okay? So in a certain sense, we can say that the fetus is uncreated, isn't that right? Because it is no longer appropriate for the environment that it's in. It's obviously on its way somewhere else. And you can't really say that it's been created until it gets there. It's true, isn't it? Otherwise, we don't call it a human being, we call it a miscarriage. Is that right? It didn't get created yet. And if I can look and see that perhaps when I come here, what I know of what a human's evolution is not complete, then I only know about a very small part of it for the simple reason that for us to evolve completely, I have to work on it myself. There's only so much natural evolution that we get as a semi-automatic process. At a certain point in the process of evolving as a being, I must cooperate. I have to do some of the work. X won't do it all. You can see that very clearly in the way this is set up. X balances for what the awareness sees as true and valuable. Okay. So if there's any place to go beyond what we know of as adults, which around here we call, in technical terms, grown-ups, because the truth is we don't know what an adult is. We've probably never met one. We've heard rumors about them occasionally, but we've probably never met one. All we know is grown-ups. That to go beyond that stage that people call grown-ups and evolve into something more than that or greater than a grown-up requires that the awareness see that it's true and valuable. That's all you get naturally. So,
The awareness see that what's true and valuable in this. The growing
evolving,
up part.
Evolving further, that's right. It has to see it as true and valuable and do some of the initiating itself. It has to provide some of the first force to get it done. X will not initiate that itself. Because that's what natural evolution is, isn't it? X provides all the first force. I was in the womb, I didn't sit there and think, okay, it's time to grow eyes now. You see, X provided the first force for that. In fact, I occasionally tell a story that amuses me, which is that at one point in that whole stage, I kind of resemble a newt. I didn't really have arms and legs yet. I had little buds, you know. Have you ever seen those pictures where they just look kind of like little, you know,
Flippers.
Yeah, kind of. They do look kind of like flippers. Not really, but kind of. And you have a tail. Is that right? And you have gills. So if you think about it, at that point in time, you're pretty well perfectly suited to your environment, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
You have the ability if you were cut off from that little umbilical cord to breathe and move around, you could swim around real good. So you're pretty much at that point in time perfectly suited to your environment, aren't you? And I always figured that if I didn't know what was going on, it's probably a good thing I don't at that point in time, I would say, this is perfect. And when X says, well, it's time to get rid of those gills, I'd say, but then what am I going to breathe with? You can't do that. Well, we kind of need to develop lungs, you know. Why? What little there is right now is full of water. What good are they? And it would say, you know, those little buds you got, let's turn them into arms and legs. And I'd say, no, don't take away my little things, you know, that's how I move. And it would say, let's drop the tail, you know. And no, not my tail. And so we'd all pop out here looking like little newts if we were in charge. Because we wouldn't have the foresight to know where we're going, would we? And we'd say, no, I'm perfectly adapted to my environment right now. But fortunately, X knows what the next step in this game is. So X prepares me for it. Now, if we take that little analogy a little bit further, what if it's still true? What if the next step in the evolution for me is to become something that doesn't make sense to me? What would I do? Would I struggle against it? That's right, because now I can. Isn't that right? And so I probably will. So that is what we mean by uncreated. We've reached a point in our evolution where we could go on, but we can see no reason to do so. In fact, we don't even see ourselves in the true light that we are, which is that even though I have become what is called an adult or a grown-up in this world, in the physical world, inside in my inner world, I'm actually still a child. That's just the way it is. Who may never grow beyond that point, because I can't see any reason to go beyond being a child. Okay? And so it is quite accurate to say that most human beings have never been created. That they're like little fetuses that never grew far enough to even be born into the next world. So they've been created as fetuses, but not as a human being. So, but that's the way the four forces work, isn't it? That in every complex process, there is so much initiating to do to get the job done that sometimes each of those steps of initiation that has its own resistance goes all the way to a created form itself, doesn't it? I mean, if I think about just a simple thing, really, like cooking dinner, something complex in dinner, okay? Let's say we're going to bake a cake, because I was just reading about baking cake, so I can use this real simple, it's on the mind. The first thing I got to do is make a batter, isn't that right? It'd be kind of tough to make a cake without a batter. And that has its own four forces, and eventually I have a thing called batter. But that batter is just initiative in a cake, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's a completed thing to itself. But most of us don't get real turned on by eating batter. Some do.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want a whole, plate full of it, but a little bit's kind of neat, right? But I want a cake. So now I have a whole set of four forces that created what is actually first force in making a cake. But I do have what appears to be a completed thing, isn't that right? Batter. But if someone walked up and said, "Is the cake done yet?" would you say, "Oh, no, yeah." See, it's not created yet, is it? It's uncreated still. It's in process. Well, that's the way it is for we humans. We look and we see all the things that have already been accomplished, because they do make up their own sets of four forces, but they're all part of the initiative of the true potential for a human being. Okay? But if I don't see that, if I don't see that I'm just a child that still is to grow into something that would be the full potential of a human being, which perhaps would be to one day live something like this or somewhere near like that again, only in a whole new way, because now the purpose would be one that an intelligent being picked, rather than an infant that only had senses and didn't have a mind, and didn't have feelings, didn't have something else that we don't know much about. I'll talk about that in a bit. Okay? But when an infant is born here, it has no mind. And it does not have the ability to have feelings about things. It can have sensations. That's it. So the decision about what the purpose of living when we first get here is made based entirely on what it is sensed. We cannot use the incredible intelligence that can come through looking at things with a mind. We cannot use the understanding that can come through having feelings about things. All we can do is base it on what we sense, because that's all we know of living at that point, because each of these is an individual. It has its own awareness that sees from its own point of view, and at that time the point of view is entirely about sensations. That's it. Is it a very low degree of temperature or a very high one, or somewhere in between? Is it pleasant or unpleasant, or I don't care? That's all that we can do. We don't have anything else at that point in time. So we make a decision that's perfectly reasonable at that time. So it may be that part of that evolution would be to come back to something very similar to this, but on a higher level of evolution, you see. Because what has changed is that this is integrated again, and we're going to see shortly, it doesn't stay that way long, but it's now for an intelligent purpose. That means that this incredible intelligence can now express, because the purpose is there to be consciously intelligent. Okay? And that making an effort to see what it would take to get back to this, to take away all the stuff that has been put into this, and get back to it being this simple, but now with the intent of demonstrating conscious intelligence, might be the continuance of our evolution. Okay? Which makes this very difficult for us to grasp, because we're used to thinking in terms of getting something or escaping something. We're not used to thinking in terms of removing things. I either run like hell from things I don't like, or I go towards things I do like, in other words. And this is all about taking things that are already there away, whether you like them or not. And so we have a lot of trouble grasping what this is all about. It says that one has been contaminated with many things that do not belong there. And the job of the awareness in this whole game of continuing the evolution is to take out what was put there in error. That whatever else there is about evolution, which we really know very little about, that X will do if we take the initiative and begin to look at what we put into the awareness and say it doesn't belong there. Get rid of it. That's the bulk of what all work on self is about. It is not about adding anything, which would be to gain something. It is not about escaping anything, because that would be to leave it there and find a way not to have it affect me. It is about literally getting rid of it. You see? And that's completely outside of our understanding because of the purpose we have now based on sensation that says I should gain sensations that I consider to be pleasurable or good, and I should get rid of or never experience or find some way to overpower or run away from sensations that I consider to be bad or unpleasant. That's called the purpose of living, is to be non-disturbed. Okay? And we're not saying that any of this is bad as we get rid of it, or that it's good as we get rid of it. We just say it doesn't belong there. It was put there in error. Because it generates false descriptions of reality to life, which then attempts to balance me to this non-existent reality. And the consequence is that I am out of balance and dying. Because that is what out-of-balance things do, is they destroy themselves. Okay? They can no longer be a living thing. They can be a dead thing that is food for other living things. That would be to be in balance as that particular form, but not as a living being. Once you get far enough out of balance, this incredible thing called intelligence can no longer be in union with matter, which is what we're looking at here, you see. We're seeing intelligence being one with matter, and that takes a certain particular state of balance. If it's in some other balance, then it's very clear that intelligence can no longer be in union with matter. Make sense?
Yeah.
So to look at what has been put into this, where it doesn't,
Over by the wall.
okay, doesn't belong there, we can see that what we start to do is find ways to get non-disturbance because it's impossible. In other words, if non-disturbance were possible, I wouldn't need ways to get it. I'd just go get it. There are thousands and thousands of ways to go get cigarettes because it's still possible. You don't need a way to get cigarettes. There are so many, it's unbelievable. I like his method the best. Steal them from other people and call it bumming them or borrowing them. That's even better. Can I borrow a cigarette? Yes, but please don't give it back when you're done, okay? There's so many ways to do that. It's incredible because it's possible. We don't need to sit around and plot out ways to get cigarettes, do we? We just use the one that's most appropriate at this moment. Because there are many, many, many. That's a simple thing, cigarettes. I don't know too many people, there are a few that make lots of silly stories, but I don't know too many people who plot out ways of breathing. Because breathing just ain't that tough for most of us. Now there are a few people that have problems with it, and they do think about it a lot, don't they? And there are others who have bought stories that if you just breathed in a certain way, some mystical, magical thing would happen. And so they play around with their breathing. But most of us, we just don't think about it at all, do we? Because it ain't that big a deal. So what we need ways for are for those things that are like really tough. It's just that the ones we're going to talk about aren't just tough.
Impossible.
Right. So for the first of those ways is that we decide that it is important that I have my way now. And the way to get it is to complain. Now, actually, the first decision that I make, if you really consider it, is that it is important that I only have pleasant sensations and never have bad ones, isn't it? That's called the purpose for my life, which we around here called regaining non-disturbance, because I did have that in the womb. So I imagine that it's possible. In the womb, I pretty much only had pleasant sensations when I even had sensations. Most of the time in the womb, I didn't even have sensations. But then I was ornery. I've heard about other people that had them for a while. They were all pretty good, weren't they, Paula? I know you say you remember a bit of time there.
Mm-hmm.
So I was ornery. I didn't get into the body for the last minute. I kept saying I ain't going in that thing. So by the time I got in, it was having pretty unpleasant sensations. So being born, okay, because I said, you know, I've always been kind of that way. You know, I'll do it about 2 seconds before it needs to get done. Isn't that about right, Paula?
That's
Paula's a planner, you know. She likes to have everything all mapped out and get there in time. And I have a tendency to say, wait till the very last sentence and say, okay, it's time, and we show up just at the right moment to get it done, don't we?
That's right.
Not a second to spare.
Not one.
That's just the way I am. That's where I was when I came here. I guess I ain't changing, you know, for nothing. But at any rate, it was a pretty pleasant time there, even though I don't know too much about the sensations of it. I know about what it was like to be there. And we come here with some pretty unpleasant stuff, so we believe that non-disturbance is possible. Because we did have an experience of it. And we're not aware or intelligent or experienced enough at that time to say, but it was somewhere else. And I ain't never going to be able to go back there, as far as I know. Although we do have lots of rumors that when you leave this place, you go to a place that's almost as good. Isn't that right? If you do the right things here. Of course, if you do the wrong things and you go to a place that's, ooh, even worse than here. Can you imagine? We don't know if those rumors are true. It's just what we've been told a few times by some folks, okay? And the next decision is that I reaffirm the importance of only having pleasant sensations and never having unpleasant sensations. I say, yes, that I was right. That is important because it still makes sense to me. It means that the body is reporting that because I am helpless, I am unable to balance with the environment I'm in on my own. I need help. When the body runs out of fuel, I can't just get up and, you know, go to the fridge and pop open some milk and pour it in a little bottle and stick it under some hot water, you know. I can't do that. X is just not able to do all those things with the body. It ain't finished yet. So I can't balance back with the environment. Now, I'm accurately reporting at this point in time because all I'm reporting is sensations. I don't have a mind yet. I don't have feelings yet. So I'm accurately reporting. I'm uncomfortable. In other words, I'm getting out of balance here for a living form with the environment that I'm in. And so I do this little thing. I let out a yowl, and somebody jumps to, and they come do what's appropriate because X can't do it with this body yet. It's helpless. So this decision makes perfectly good sense for that infant, doesn't it? It basically says I'm experiencing sensations that tell me that soon I will no longer be able to support life. I'll be out of here. And I don't like it. And so I scream really loud and somebody comes along. And the balancing act happens, but it happens through a couple bodies instead of one. Now, one of these days I won't be helpless anymore and I can do it myself. If I get hungry, I can take care of it myself. Which is not exactly true, is it? Because I am sort of dependent on other people to grow the food and put it in grocery stores, you know. If I had to do everything myself, I wouldn't have time to grow food. Or if I grew food, I wouldn't have time to make shelter if I made it. You know, it's not really true that I can do it all by myself. But while I'm not independent, I am able. So together we all cooperate and make a place where people can survive quite easily. We all do our little part, you know. So I'm not really dependent on any particular people, but we are all mutually interdependent. We need a few more than one to survive here. Now we imagine that that's not true, of course, because whenever we think of surviving in the aftermath of a destroyed civilization where you still go to the supermarket and get your food. You still drop by the local department store and pick up some clothes. But unless you're in an incredibly temperate environment, you ain't going to survive long if you're by yourself. Okay. What happens the first time you break a leg and you're all alone and you can't get to the supermarket?
Stop. That's what happens.
Right? So it sounds pretty, but we really can't do it. But at least there does come a point where I'm not dependent on any particular person. I can do things for self, you see. I'm not dependent on a particular person. I'm just dependent on the mutual efforts of all of us. Okay? Which basically makes me more or less independent, doesn't it? Since we are all doing that effort. And after a little while of this, I come to an interesting conclusion. This works. I yowl and somebody takes care of me most of the time. You know, occasionally they maybe don't hear me or something, but pretty much it works. If I just keep yowling long enough, they'll show up and they'll put me back into balance and I'll feel pretty good, at least for a couple minutes, until some other sensation comes along and says it needs attention. And so I make a new decision. I come to a new conclusion about life. And that is, I have rights. This is my right to be taken care of. To have someone else do all that is necessary to keep me in balance. That's really the first decision that we make about rights. It is my right to have others take care of me. Isn't that right? And I must stick up for my rights. Well, let's say this properly and say, and it is important that I stick up for my rights, because that is the way the decision is made. To me, I must is the same word, but I realize for most people it isn't. They think of it as some other thing, but that's what that actually means, okay? It is important that I stick up for my rights, because that's the only way I can be non-disturbed, is if I have these things that I have decided are my rights. And of course, the little addendum to that is, and I know what my rights are. Isn't that right? We all know what our rights are. And every now and again we discover a new one that we didn't know about, and we say, yeah, that's one of them too. I just hadn't heard about that one yet, but that's pretty good, and I'll stick it in there too. That sounds like one of the ones I got, yeah. Okay. So it doesn't just stay as simple as I have a right to be taken care of. I eventually develop many, many, many rights. Just as I develop many, 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 many ways of complaining.
You can add a few more menus in there.
Okay. Many, 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 many ways. Okay. That is one of the most pervasive things that human beings do when they're living this way, isn't it? Bitch, bitch, bitch. In just about every way they can possibly think of. If all else fails, bitch. That'll fix it. Well, it did once. See, It did fix it once. Now, along about this time, the human being begins to develop on the material part, you know, that physical body part. To begin with, its idea of its purpose was to always have physical sensations that were pleasant, or at least comfortable. And what kicked in these decisions about how to get non-disturbance was when I had a sensation that I didn't like, that I called painful. Every time one of those little uncomfortable or painful sensations came along, then number one kicked in and I started complaining because I wasn't getting my purpose, my first decision anymore, my primary decision, the master decision as we call it, okay. I'm getting something I don't want, and the way to escape it, the only way I got right now is to scream my little head off. And then, as I say, we begin to develop rights. About that time, we pretty well developed on another level, which is called the mental level. And I discover that I really like being paid attention to. That whatever else this mind can do, it can sense attention. I can tell when I'm being paid attention to and what kind of attention it is. And so we don't only just want attention, we're kind of picky, we want a certain kind of attention, you see. What we might call favorable attention, isn't that right? We don't like the other kind when you're, kind of getting bad attention, But we do like the sensation that the mind has when it notices that attention is placed on it from somebody else. And sometimes from self, but mostly from somebody else. We can feel it. When I was a little kid, we used to sit in crowded areas and just stare at people until they turned around and looked to see who was staring at them. Did you ever do that? We thought that was just the damnedest thing, You remember doing that when you were a little kid? I think most kids do that at some time or another. They sort of notice this. Hi, Mike. They sort of notice that we can notice when people are paying attention to us, and so I think we all kind of do that. And of course we think it's some kind of magic thing, extrasensory perception or something. That's what we used to think. We used to dream, or they read in our minds what's going on. It's the simplest damn thing, isn't it? They notice we're putting attention on it. Okay? And we can tell when that attention is what's called not favorable, or as we usually say, I'm being ignored or rejected. Now, ignored means you're intentionally withholding your attention from me. It's not like, you don't know I'm here. It's just that you're intentionally pulling it away. You see, well, that's called unfavorable attention, isn't it? Because I'm getting your attention most of the time. You know damn well I'm here. Occasionally you do just sort of forget. That's even worse, when I can't feel any attention from you at all. And rejection, that's kind of active, isn't it? That's when I give you a certain kind of attention that says, get out of here. I don't want you here no more, isn't that right? So we can sense different kinds of attention when it's being just not there at all, or when it's kind of unfavorable attention, where the person wants to get rid of us. Their attention is really trying to push us away instead of draw. It's not interest anymore that draws to. It's pushing us away, isn't that right? So you can do odd things with attention that most people know nothing about. They've seen little examples of it in their lives. Okay. But we don't really pay much attention attention to the fact that the mind can sense what attention is doing in self and others. Okay? Now, if you start to catch on to this, you can actually do some pretty neat things. You can tell whether people are paying attention or not. That's a pretty neat thing, if you ask me. I mean, if you need people's attention for some reason or another, at least you know whether you got it, or they're just sitting there with their eyeballs glued open. You know, I think sometimes people put little toothpicks in their eyeballs and they go to sleep. You know, pop them open. And then you can tell if they're doing that. Okay? And you may have noticed that even though there was suddenly a very loud noise a little while ago, nobody jumped but one person, and they didn't jump. But you notice that nobody in this room jumped? Because it wasn't done the way most people do a loud noise. It was done with an understanding of this. That was a demo. It was done mostly with a particular kind of attention. So the person didn't jump, and neither did anyone around. Do you notice that? He just sort of opened his eyes very slowly and said, "Oh, hi." Okay? Very odd, huh? You can do some very odd things when you start to understand that we have other senses besides the five that the physical body has, that the mind has senses of its own. And it can do things with attention. Okay? The noise was actually unnecessary. It just made a better demo, especially for the folks on the tape. Okay? Even this young lady, who is very disturbed by loud noises, didn't jerk. And she is, I'm not joking, she's very sensitive to loud noises. So this decision is made partly with the mind, and I also make up new decisions that I deserve attention. I have a right to favorable attention as well, not just to being taken care of. And you see when the child starts doing this, because sometimes now it starts complaining because it's not getting attention. And you go to see what's wrong, and nothing's wrong, it just didn't have enough attention. And if you just stand there and dangle little things in front of it for a while, it'll get all happy again, and then you can walk away. But there was nothing physically wrong. The mind just hadn't had enough attention for a while, and I have a right to attention, you see. So you can see as I begin to grow that I remake these decisions over and over again about every new experience that I have. Until eventually this falls apart so much that I can't make decisions at all anymore. We'll talk about that shortly. We pretend to after a while, but they're no longer decisions. They're things we technically around here call choices. Okay? Deciding whether I want a rock or a hard place is not a decision as far as I'm concerned. That's a choice. Not much of one, but it's a choice, okay? It's not a decision because I wouldn't decide to do either one of those. Okay? Now at this point, the fact is that this child is still what one could consider to be an integrated personality, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It has some very odd decisions, and it is beginning to sort of fragment a tad, but they're all working together pretty good. I do have need for a certain amount of attention, just as I have need for a certain amount of food. The body senses that for a very good reason. There is a certain amount of food value for the mind in attention, just as the physical body desires certain things that it requires, like food, touching. Very odd things happen to a person if they don't get touched ever so often. We actually need a certain amount of touching from other people. And we begin to crave it after a while if we don't have it. Same thing happens with the mind. It sort of craves a certain amount of attention after a while if it doesn't get it, because it does need it. Not very much, but a little bit. So it starts to get out of balance. So this infant that is screaming out for attention is dealing with a very real thing. Even though on the purely physical level, it is in balance with its world. If it gets starved for attention, the mind starts to say, I'm not being fed. And it goes out of balance again and demands food. So it's a perfectly reasonable thing still for this child to do. It's surviving quite well, even though it's still helpless. Okay? The only difficulty is that while it's surviving very well, it's extremely annoying to everyone else. But fortunately, the body begins to develop some more. And we develop another level that we can call the feeling level. Well, never really has feelings, but at any rate, we'll talk about that later. And on that level, I discover that I am able to sense whether I'm being approved of, and I find that being approved of is quite pleasurable to me. And I can tell when you are disapproving of me, and I don't like it one bit. Now, thanks to this, we now have a new way to punish the child, don't we? That's very powerful. You don't even have to hit it. Just tell it you don't approve of it. Just disapprove of its behavior. So the folks around this child begin to control the child, which is now behaving as a kind of a wild animal, by disapproving of it primarily. Occasionally a little bit of corporal stuff, isn't that right? Where you beat it or deprive it of food or something for a while, and it does something that disturbs you because it's living in a world full of infants itself, and they don't like being disturbed by this kid. So every time the kid disturbs its infant parents, called grown-ups, they teach it right quick that if it wants to be non-disturbed, it must learn to please others. So we make a new decision that I must, or it is important, we'll go back to saying it that way, it is important that I please others to get my way. Because they make it real clear that if I don't, they will disturb me through one of these sensations that I call painful. Most of the time it's disapproval, isn't it? Mm-hmm. They will disapprove of what I did, and I find that very unpleasant. Okay? Now we're beginning to get into difficulties. I could sort of deal with needing pleasure and comfort and attention. Okay? The decisions that I've made to deal with that work pretty good. I could sort of deal with being concerned about pain and being ignored or rejected. But once we get to this age, we're starting to actually, have a mind that's working and have feelings, and it gets a little tough getting what I want out of life, which is to have approval all of the time and attention all of the time, favorable attention, and pleasure and comfort all of the time, and to never have pain, and to never be ignored or rejected, and to never be disapproved of. This gets a little tough, doesn't it? And now I find that I'm not only doing these things that are supposed to get me my way when I'm disturbed or when I have some of the pain side that I want to escape, I also find that I'm doing it just because I want more of this. The pleasure side, the side I want to gain. Because sensations wear off so fast that to keep that idea of non-disturbance that I got going, I got to keep getting more and more and more all the time. So now I start complaining if I don't get enough attention. It's not enough that I just get attention, you know. Or I say that they get better pleasures than I do. Oh, look, their toys are better than my toys. Well, something wrong with your toys? No, but theirs is better. Or I want different ones, you see. So we start getting real sophisticated along about now, isn't that right? And it's no longer really about being in balance with the environment now. Now I'm starting to draw pictures about things that aren't even true. I gotta have more attention. Well, I really don't. I just want it. But I start drawing pictures of these terrible things that will happen in my head if I don't get more attention, isn't that right? Why, my life will just be over. Or if I don't get that particular toy, I start drawing these terrible pictures in my head about how terrible it'll be. And I start reporting this to X as being my actual environment, you know, that my world will end if I don't get that toy now. And that's not true. But X balances to it, and now I start getting all sorts of discomforts that have nothing to do with the body surviving anymore. And on top of it, I go into a state of inner conflict, because the three ways that I have so far of getting what I want can't be done at the same time. Whereas before I was still integrated, I could complain and stick up for my rights all in one breath. Right? One big yowl and I was doing both. But I can't please you while I'm yowling, because that's what got you to start telling me I had to please you in the first place, was to shut me up. It's like, stop yowling all the time. Stop telling me you have rights you don't have. See, like the right to play with anything you damn well please. Whether it's dangerous to you, whether it's valuable to me, you don't have the right to play with everything that you can see. But the kid thinks he does, doesn't he? Or she. And it acts like it does, so we come along and say, no, you've got to please me, and that isn't pleasing to me, sticking up for all these rights. Well, now I'm kind of in trouble, aren't I? Because the only ways that I know to get what I want out of this world, I can't do them at the same time. This side says do what you want, and this side says I'll do what they want. And I can't do both of those at the same time. So I'm now starting to sort of fall apart inside. I can no longer be said to be an integrated personality. In fact, I've actually disintegrated into two personalities. One that wants its way all the time, and one that wants to do what you want, or to have your way so I can get my way. One that says, no way will I do it your way, I just want what I want, and I want it now, and I'm going to stick up for my rights and beat you up until you give it to me. And another that says, but that won't work, I got to do it your way and be nice and, you know, play fair and share and all these things that I don't want to do, but it's the only way to keep from getting that dreaded disapproval. And I start reporting all these things to X as true, that this is what my environment is. I must have these things, and I have all these odd ways of doing it, but unfortunately I don't agree, so I'm reporting conflicting ideas at the exact same time about what's going on in my environment, aren't I? The next attempts to balance, well, he doesn't attempt, actually, he balances quite well to those things as they flick back and forth between all this odd stuff, except that the fact is I'm out of balance because most of it, what I'm reporting is no longer true. I want attention all the time, and I don't need attention all the time. It's just not necessary. I want a little bit, it's true. I want approval all the time, but I don't need it all the time. But that's what I start saying. That's the only way that I can find to get my purpose, which is to be non-disturbed. So I'm reporting all these weird scenarios to life. Environments that don't even exist. And X is balancing to that. But in fact, I'm out of balance and I begin to experience discomforts on these levels. And then of course, what do but use the very methods that got me into this fix to try to deal with that discomfort that came from being out of balance to the environment to try to get back in, and I'm even more out of balance. So this child that was put here to potentially grow up begins to actually fall apart and disintegrate. Rather than being integrated, it begins to be disintegrating. Our job is to rediscover all these things which are in what we believe to be the unconscious mind. In other words, we don't remember making these decisions. I don't think anyone remembers saying, I'm going to complain to get my way. Yeah, that's it. Because I didn't even have a mind at that time. That decision was made before words even existed for me. It was made on a sensory level, as in a way that we normally don't even make decisions anymore. It's very difficult for us to remember. Because we're used to thinking about things in words now that we have a mind, or maybe in feelings. Same with this decision. This was made with very little mental thing going on. It was mainly sensations. This one began to be made with some feelings and a little bit of thinking. We can remember more about this one than any of the rest, can't we? Because the mind was getting somewhat developed then, and we can remember perhaps seeing that I was going to have to start pleasing others, and I didn't want to. But these are so early on, and the body is functioning in such a different way that most of us can't even get at that recording. And that's really all that's in the unconscious mind, is that all these recordings of all these events and decisions that were made, which are not very accessible to us in what's called the conscious mind. So it is just about impossible to cast these things out unless somebody comes along and points them out to us, because we just can't see them. And yet they run our lives. And that is the first job that we have, is to take the information that has been given so far and begin to check it out, so that we don't just believe it, but we can see it as observably true. And start to understand this idea that what those have done is contaminated what was once a pretty pristine, pure, integrated thing. The stuff that reports improper environments to life. It describes environments that just don't exist, which leads to even further disintegration. And see the need to cast these things out so that I can pick up where I left off many, many years ago and start evolving further. Okay. Let's take a very short break because we're getting quite late here, about maybe 2-3 minutes. We'll give you a chance to relax, and then we'll come up with experiments for the week and take any questions or comments. So what could we do to begin to see these things in relationship? I mean, part of it is really obvious to just start seeing these 3 decisions. But there's a few other relationships that would be really valuable to see, which is, when do I use them?
Yeah.
and start noticing that at this point in my life, while at one time it was very simple, I did it to escape what I considered to be painful, which was a reasonable thing to do at the time, although it's not anymore because it's all based on being helpless, and I'm not anymore, which is where we get into this other idea that would be useful to see, is that I'm describing an environment that does not exist. When I complain, I'm saying I'm helpless and need someone else to do it for me. Well, that's not true anymore. That is an environment that no longer is here. So I'm describing to X this odd environment that says, somehow or another I've been disabled, I lost my arms and I lost my legs, and all I have left is my throat, you know, and it screams and nobody cares. Or perhaps they do, but they act very oddly because they don't think I'm helpless. So I'm no longer describing an environment that's real. I'm describing one that X balances to quite fine, but it makes me uncomfortable because I'm actually out of balance with the true environment. And that's one of the things we want to see here, is not just that I still act by these decisions that have been made a long time ago, but also that they're describing a whole world to X that doesn't exist. And so as X balances to that, I'm actually out of balance with my true environment. So the awareness is no longer doing its job. I won't cast something out if I can't see it as something that I want to get rid of. So it would be nice to see that as well. And to start seeing how these things that we've talked about here, the gaining and the escaping, and see how just having pleasant sensations on these three levels is no longer enough. I actually strive to gain more. That this really is gain. It's not just experience pleasant sensations, it's get as much as I can. And start seeing that both of these, escaping pain and wanting to gain more pleasure or better pleasure or different pleasures, also gets me to use these old decisions. Okay? So the obvious experiments are to make a list of these three decisions and see all the ways that I complain. So I can start to see that what has appeared to me to be very complex human behavior can be simplified into a few simple ideas. And I forgot to mention, but of course most of you know, but we're acting like you don't today, that there are three other things, here. But at least we can start looking at these three things, that many, many, many seemingly complex behaviors are actually based on these three simple decisions. So I can do that. I can make three little lists: complaining, sticking up for rights, pleasing others, and start paying attention to all the different ways that I do that. That's the obvious stuff. Okay. Can you see any other experiments that could be done to see some of these other relationships that we've mentioned?
I'm very curious to see what kind of an environment I'm telling X about. This is a really new idea. Underlining these descriptions. There's some experiences where I assumed they were lies. And then the observation of the life and what was going on in it was screwy. Mm-hmm. It never occurred to me to put those two together, but since we're talking about experiment, I want to observe what kind of environment I'm lying about, what that looks like.
Okay. So what would you do to do that? I'm going to inquire into that question. What would I do?
Well, after I observed the whichever decision I was complaining about, for instance, then I would observe to see what the environment looks like to me, what the environment is.
Okay. So we could maybe add that onto each of those sheets of paper. On each of the sheets of paper, we could have as one thing what was done. So if it was complaining, I say, well, I stuck my tongue out at somebody. That's complaining. I see folks do it. Grown-ups. Okay, that's a complaint. That's one possible reason for sticking your tongue out at somebody, isn't that right? You're complaining about something. So that's what I did to complain. I stuck my tongue out at somebody. We could have room on that same sheet of paper to perhaps consider at a later date, maybe I can't do it right that moment, it'd just be too much time. What was I telling X about what was going on? What was the environment that was being described by that particular decision that generated this odd function called sticking the tongue out? Was it the actual environment? So we could do that with all of them. When I decide to get my way by buying somebody a little gift or something, I can write that down. Well, I decided that I would get some nice pleasure or escape some pain perhaps by buying somebody a little gift and pleasing them, and what was the environment that was being described at that time? Was it accurate? So, what else?
Well, this may be part of the environment, but I'd like to specifically see when I do one of those three things, what am I trying to get?
Good. So we'll have a third column. Was this an attempt to gain or escape something? And if so, what? Maybe more than one thing. It didn't have to be just one thing. It could have been pleasure and approval. Or it could have been to get some pleasure or get some attention and escape some disapproval. I don't know. But I can make that another column and see if, each of these things there was an attempt to gain or escape something. Or I should say gain and or escape something, right? What else?
We're not going to do the fourth one? Of the 4 DBUs, we're just going to do the 3 this week?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's getting so late.
Right.
I could look at
Obviously, you can put it down, you know that.
Okay.
I could look at when I'm uncomfortable, what am I saying about the environment?
That would be an interesting thing to do, wouldn't it? Work the other way around. When I'm experiencing some sort of discomfort or being ignored or rejected or being disapproved of, what do I think is going on? What am I seeing? Maybe it won't always, there might be some other things going on, but it'd be interesting to see if quite often I'm describing something that just isn't there to X. Well, at least check it out. There might be other reasons for that,
Yeah.
but that could be one, describing an improper environment. Now, if a tree falls on me, I might feel uncomfortable when I never described an improper environment, okay? So there could be other reasons besides that, but that you may find out how often it's because there was an improper environment. So I don't think trees fall on us too often. So. But I feel uncomfortable a little bit more often than trees fall on me, isn't that right? So that's another experiment I could do. What else? Well, I know another column I'd stick on the piece of paper. Did it fucking work? I'd make a fourth column that says, did it work? I said I wanted to gain or escape something. Did I? You're going to look at something that's designed to do something. Let's see if it did it. That's what we're saying, isn't it? It was designed to accomplish a task. I'd like to know if it accomplished it or not. I think that'll keep you busy for a week or two or three or four. Okay. Any questions or comments? Nope. All right. Till next week.